Hi, and welcome to the first chapter reading of Realm of Dragons, Fight for the Crown. This is my latest release, and for those that are wondering, there will be a sequel. I'm writing it at the moment, so let's read it. Betrayal. Thick, bright orange hair threaded through with daisies and buttercups danced merrily out behind the little girl as she skipped up the stone steps. Her tunic and leggings were grass-stained and smeared with mud from a brief moment of play. Scampering up from behind on oversized and clumsy feet, with his tongue hanging out the side of his mouth, came a russet and black striped puppy, a recent birthday present from her father. Running through the large open doors, she raced down the long and wide hall, the soles of her shoes slipping loudly on polished marble floors. Tegan was late, and she hoped her father would not be angry. Skidding on the floor, she turned to climb the large white and gold staircase, her own breath puffing as much as the puppy that followed in her wake. Reaching the top, she could see the doors to the balcony that were already open, and the straight back of her father as he stood looking out on a clear blue sky. He turned at the sound of her steps and bent down, his arms thrown wide and a smile on his face. She rushed into those arms and he picked her up. "Papa, I'm sorry," she cried out breathlessly. "You're just in time, my Tegan." He turned with her in his arms, and they looked out over the lake-filled valley that spread out below them. Tegan heard the noise before she saw the riders in their magnificent mounts. The rush of their wings as they powered through the air was a soft whooshing sound, but the cry from their gaping and teeth-filled mouths were loud. It echoed off the steep mountainsides of their lake valley, and she watched in awe as the riders passed them. Their green leather armor gleamed in the summer sunshine as they bent over the necks of the dragons they rode. As they passed the balcony she was on, they each raised an arm in salute to her father, the general of riders. Tegan's heart swelled with pride for her father. All too soon they had passed and were moving out for their mission. "Papa, when I grow up, I want to be a rider," she exclaimed to him. "My daughter, a common rider? I think not." He placed her on the ground in front of him, stood at attention and saluted her. "No, my daughter will one day be the greatest of generals." He took her hand gently in his own large one, and they walked back inside the citadel. The puppy followed dutifully behind, stopping to sniff at the plinths that lined the corridor, each holding a bust of a past general of riders. They were just nearing the head of the stairs when they heard a platoon of soldiers coming up. Their burnished helmets gleamed in the light that filtered through the large windows as they ascended higher, with their spears all straight and tall and their swords strapped to their sides. Their booted feet sounded loud in unison as they approached the general and his daughter. "General Nonsai," the man said in front as they came to a halt in front of the pair. His armor was highly decorated with golden inlay and great swirls. "Is there something you wish to see me about, Domhnall?" her father said, still holding her hand tightly. "You are to come with me, sir. You are wanted by the king," Domhnall said loudly. "Don't make a fuss in front of your daughter, Thorane. Go with dignity and face the accusations about to be laid at your feet," Domhnall added quietly to him. Tegan looked up at her father and saw him straighten himself to his full height. He looked down at her and gave her a small, grim smile. "You have to be brave today, Tegan. Show me that you have the spirit to become your dream," he said, and he moved around the assembled soldiers and headed down the stairs with her hand firmly clasped in his. Tegan turned her head to watch the soldiers turn and follow them down. Then she caught sight of her little puppy. "Billy, come!" she called to him in a small, frightened voice. The puppy looked down the stairs and hesitated before he began to bound down after her. Her little feet had to hurry to keep up with her father's long strides as he made his way to the throne room. A narrow red carpet ran the length of the long room. It had a high ceiling, and many banners hung off the upper balcony that was supported by thick, white marbled columns. The carpet led to the throne, which sat on a dais, and perched on the red cushions of the most ordinary-looking chair was a man. A plain circle of beaten gold sat on his brow. His clothing was so simple that if he had been walking down the street, no one would presume he was anything but an ordinary man. His dark hair was pulled back and tied with a cord at the nape of his neck. At his feet and to the side sat a chest, and beside that chest on his knees was a man in a dark leather jacket. His blond head was bowed, his hands were tied behind his back, and two more of the soldiers that followed Tegan and her father were standing over him. Thorane stopped in front of his ruler and bowed deeply to him. He did not let go of his daughter's hand, and he stood again, straight, as he faced his king. From a side door 2 men arrived, both in uniform of high-ranking riders. Walking a step behind, 2 boys followed them in. One was in the garb of a common rider and the other an apprentice. Neither of the men looked at Thorane or his daughter as they stopped, and all 4 bowed to the throne. Tegan looked at the younger men, and the apprentice winked at her. He had smiling eyes, and his hands were clasped behind his back as they turned from her and back to what was going on before them. "My lord, King Ermund," Thorane addressed the man at the throne. "General Loinsire, is it true? For I cannot understand how one of my highest-ranking advisors can be accused of such a crime. Tell me that this man lies, and I will punish him for it, and continue the search for the true criminal," King Ermund said, his voice gentle. "I have never lied to my king, and I will not start now," replied Thorane, and his large hand trembled slightly around his young daughter's smaller one. The king hung his head for a moment and then pushed himself out of the chair. Slowly he descended the short steps down to stand in front of Thorane. "Why, my friend? Tell me why." "I would appreciate it, my king, if we could not discuss this matter in front of my daughter." There was a catch in his voice, and the king looked down at the little girl. He crouched, and his hand went out to scratch her puppy's ears. "Tegan, you take your dog outside for a moment. I think he would enjoy exploring the formal garden." King Ermund had kind, caring eyes, and he had always had a kind word to say whenever they had met. He stood and looked around them. "Menayeth, will you please escort this young lady into the garden with her puppy? We will send someone when the matter is over." "It would be my honor, Your Highness," the young man with the smiling eyes said, coming to attention and bowing. "Go with the boy, Tegan. You'll be safe with him," her father reassured her as he held out her hand to the young man. Her hand was transferred over, and soon she was let out the same door as the 4 had entered by, her puppy bounding along at her side. As they stepped through the door, Tegan looked back at her father and saw him fall to his knees, his head bowed in front of the king. Outside, the sun shone warmly on the small walled garden that was on the side of the throne room. His hand held hers firmly as he led her to a seat, then bent down and picked her up, depositing her onto the white marbled bench. Menayeth turned from her, looking back into the hall, trying to see what was going on inside. "What's happening?" Tegan asked him quietly, and he turned back to her. "Something very serious, my lady," he told her, and came to sit at her side. The puppy was sniffing around the bushes and the flowers and came running back to them, his soft ears flapping. "What's your puppy's name?" he asked her. "Billy. My father gave him to me for my birthday," she told him. "Good sensible name for a dog." "When was your birthday?" he asked, just to be talking of something. "It was 2 weeks ago." Tegan looked at the young man, who she could see did not want to act as her babysitter. Menayeth's hair was dark and pulled back in the style appropriate for an apprentice rider, the same style as the king wore. His eyes were equally as dark, and there was twinkle to them that made her want to smile. He was tall and thin, but younger than she thought he was. His white shirt was carefully tailored, and the green leather jerkin was tight-fitting over his frame. His dark woolen leggings were common for riders to wear. His dark woolen leggings that were common for riders to wear were tucked into the high-top soft leather boots. He carried no weapons at his belt, but his wrists were covered in tough leather cuffs, buckled with common steel that would change as he rose in the ranks. "Happy birthday, my lady, if it is not too late to say it." Menayeth smiled down at her. "How old are you?" "Thank you, and I'm 9. What did Papa do?" she asked him. "I don't think you should worry about that, my lady." "But I am worrying about it. Why did he fall to his knees like he was a criminal?" Tegan had seen enough of court in her short life to know what a penitent looked like. "Your father stands accused of stealing something very precious to our lands," Menayeth told her hesitantly. "My papa is not a thief!" Tegan protested loudly, leaping from the bench. "My papa is the General of Riders." "Yes, he is, Lady Tegan, and it is because of his rank that makes the crime he committed even worse." Manaeth kept his voice low and calm. "What is he accused of stealing?" she demanded. "Dragon eggs, my lady." Tegan stared at him for a moment. Even at her tender age, she knew it was a great crime. Dragons were precious in their lands. They depended on them to keep their borders safe, and she knew that the bond a rider had with his or her dragon was absolute. From the moment the creature hatched from the egg, the rider was the first contact the small creature had. "No, he would not. I don't believe you." She turned to run back to the hall and to her father, desperate to find the truth of the matter. "My lady!" Manaeth reached out and caught her arm in his hand and held it firmly, stopping her running to Thorane. "Let me go," she called. "My lady, you cannot interrupt the king and his court. It would not help matters with your father." "But he will be killed. That crime is punishable by death." Her eyes were wide with fright and stinging as tears started to spring from them. She remembered that fact from her lessons. "I am sure our king is just and will pass a fair judgment on your father. You need to be calm and act like a true lady of the court would for the sake of your father." The tenderness in his voice calmed her, and his arms enfolded her as tears spilled down from her lashes. Manaeth sat on the bench and pulled Tegan up onto his lap and held her close, her head buried into his shoulder as she cried in fright and worry for her father. "Lady Tegan is wanted inside, Manaeth," a voice spoke close to them. Manaeth pulled her away and set Tegan down on her feet, but kept hold on both of her arms. He looked at her and gently wiped the tears away from her face. "You are a lady of the court, and you must act like it now. Be strong and brave for your father," he said kindly, then took up her hand and led her back inside behind the other young man, who looked very much like him. The king was once more on his throne, and her father was standing before him. The guard that had escorted them to the throne room was no longer behind him, but stationed at the door waiting. Tegan let go of Manaeth's hand and walked with her head held high towards her father and looked up into his face. Thorane did not look down at his daughter. Guilt and shame covered him like a cloak. "General Thorane, Lonsire, you are stripped of all rank, titles, lands, and you no longer have a place in this court. You know what the punishment is for this crime, but I will not leave an innocent child an orphan. Thorane, you are hereby banished from these lands and from this world. By way of portal, you'll be sent to your exile, along with what you can carry, and your daughter will go with you. This is my judgment and my ruling," King Ermin declared in a clear and loud voice. "General Domhnall Geralt, escort Thorane and his daughter to their quarters and allow them to pack. I would take care of what you choose, Thorane, with the world you will be spending your days on." Thorane nodded and turned, not even waiting for Tegan to follow, or taking her hand. She trotted after her father, the words of the king still rolling through her mind. Her father was safe. He would not be killed. But they had to leave their home, the only home she had known, the place where her mother had died. The doors to their quarters were guarded by 2 of the foot soldiers. Their spears were crossed before them, and they stood at ease. As soon as Domhnall neared, they snapped to attention, their shields held before them, and they stepped out of the way. Thorane opened the door and waited for Tegan to enter after him, then closed it as soon as she was through. He walked past her and sat in his chair by the fire, beckoning her over to him. Tegan ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. "I am so sorry, my girl, so very sorry," he sobbed as he held her. "I have been so stupid." "Why, Papa? Why did you do it?" she asked him. "Manaeth told you then. It's just as well he did." He disentangled her arms from him and held her face. "I have a problem with gambling, and since your good mother died, it has got away from me. I stole the eggs to pay a debt, instead of going to our king and seeking help, and now you have been brought down by my foolishness. Can you forgive me, Tegan? Will you forgive me?" "Where are we to go, Papa?" she asked quietly, frightened by how he was acting. "A world that is vastly different to ours. They do not know our way of life, and dragons are only a myth to them. They lost their great beasts a long time ago." He placed her back on the floor and stood. Thorane took in a deep breath and unclasped his uniform. Go pack a small bag of clothes, nothing fancy, and the stout pair of boots I got you to hike in." Tegan did as she was told, and soon was changed into a plain shirt and leggings. The boots her father had requested were firmly on her feet, and she held onto the strap of her bag, which was slung across her chest. She was just stepping out of the room when there came a polite knock on the door, and it opened without her father granting permission. Domhnall stood with his hand resting on the pommel of a sword strapped to his side. "Are you ready, Thorane?" he asked with a note of sadness in his voice. "We are ready," her father answered him, and he looked to his daughter, holding out his hand for her to take. Rushing to his side, she took it and smiled up at him. "As long as we are together, Papa, I don't care where we go," Tegan said bravely, remembering the words Manaeth had told her. Thorane nodded to his daughter and gave her hand a squeeze, then turned to face the doorway. "Lead the way, Domhnall." They were marched with a squadron of riders in front and foot in the back. Among the riders was Manaeth. As they joined the procession, he glanced at Tegan and gave her a small smile, then turned back to the front. The walk was long as they traversed the halls of the palace, and then as the procession moved through the long corridors of the citadel. Tegan did not see anyone else for the whole of the journey. Normally the halls and rooms were buzzing with people going about the business of keeping the kingdom running smoothly, but now it was empty and deserted. A pair of riders stood blocking their way, standing at ease, their long sabres resting point down on the floor, and their hands clasped the pommels. They stayed at ease until another man arrived. He was the same age as her father, and she recognized him from the throne room. His dark hair was cut short, and he'd come to stand in the front of Thorane. "My general," he greeted him solemnly with great respect. "Not any more, Galanan. You are general now," Thorane said sadly, but taking the man's offered forearm. "You are still my general until the moment you step through that portal," Galanan told him stoically. "Then you best give the order to open the gates. We still have a long way to go, and I want to get Tegan somewhere safe before night falls on that world." Galanan stepped away from the formed-up troops and stood at the head of the column. "Open the gates!" he called out in a loud and powerful voice. The two riders, still standing at attention, moved as one to open the large double doors and stand aside for the riders to enter. As Thorane and Tegan moved through, she became aware of the foot soldiers and General Domhnall stopping at the threshold behind them, then remembered only riders were allowed into the Hall of Secrets. Turning now to the front, she looked down the dimly lit passage. On either side, large mirrors were hung on the walls, each adorned with a different dragon motif. The style of dragon denoted where they originally came from, and there were so many different types. Elongated waterworms, short, stocky cave dwellers, and of course the large, dart-like air gliders. She turned her head as she looked at the many silvery surfaces and dark frames, fascinated by them. Waiting for the procession further down the hall stood the king and the other man who had been in the throne room. As they approached, the riders stepped to the side and stood at attention to their denounced general. Thorane stepped up to his king, Tegan's hand still firmly in his, and bowed his head, then went to his knee. "My lord King Ermund," he said, "you know that this punishment must be proclaimed throughout the land. It grieves me so much to see you laid so low by your own hand. Thorane, rise and face me," the king spoke gently. "I shall carry my shame for the rest of my life, my lord king," Thorane promised. "Try to live out the rest of your life with honor and dignity. You have the beautiful Tegan to look after. Do not let your vices get the better of you, cousin," the king said, and then embraced Thorane. When he let him go, Ermund knelt before Tegan. "And you, my little cousin, look after your father. He is going to need you more than ever to lean on. Be strong, and maybe one day we will see you at court once more. I have a gift for you, little one." He reached into his cloak and pulled out a necklace. Hanging from an intricately woven chain was a pendant of the finest silver, worked into the symbol of their land. An ornate sword with 2 dragons entwined around it, and an oval emerald set in the cross of the sword. "Keep it safe, Tegan. You may need it one day to come back to us," the king told her. "Thank you, my lord king." Her voice was small as he placed it over her head. The king was replaced by another man now. He moved forward and grasped Thoraine's forearm just as Gillinan did. "It has been a great honour, General, to serve under you." "The honour should have been mine, but I wasted it, Taryn. Don't make the same mistake I made," he advised the man, and he stepped away. Behind them they heard the group of riders move suddenly, their sabres raised up and pointing above their heads. Thorane turned to take their salute one last time. "The General!" they cried out as one, and then returned to their attention posture. "We must go now, Tegan," Thorane said to her, as he hefted his bag higher onto his shoulder and took her hand once more. They turned to face the large mirror, and Thorane pulled her along. Tegan's breath caught in her throat, and her heart began to thump faster inside her chest as they neared the mirror. She could feel her father's hand tighten around her small one, and her feet began to slow as he pulled her closer. She did not want to go near the portal, and she did not want to leave her home. Thorane kept walking forward towards the silver surface, and he reached out a hand first. She watched it pass through, and ripples were left in its wake, like the surface of a very still pond. His hand was followed by his body. The other hand still clasped hers tightly, almost hurting her. Tegan turned one last time and looked at the gathered men and women in the dim hall. She saw their faces grimly looking back at her, and the last glimpse of her home was the solemn face of Manaeth, his eyes no longer sparkling, as she passed through the portal. That's the end of chapter 1. And if you want to know what happens to Tegan and Manaeth and the many other characters that haven't been mentioned in chapter 1, then you're going to need to buy the book. I hope you do. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do read it, please, I would love to know your thoughts. Us authors love hearing from our readers. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I hope you get Realm of Dragons. Thank you. Bye.